Okay, good evening. The Tuesday, October 23rd special meeting of the Evanston Preservation Commission is called to order. It is 7:15 p.m. We have a quorum. First of all, I have a quick announcement. My understanding is that there are some cars parked in some of the aldermanic spaces that need to be moved. So if your car is parked there, if you could please move it. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone. And just because many of you likely haven't been to a Preservation Commission meeting before, I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to describe what our meeting scope will be tonight, and then also a little bit about the process. First of all, in terms of the scope, essentially the Preservation Commission will determine if the city's certificate of appropriateness application for the demolition of the Harley Clark Mansion meets the standards for demolition that are set forth in the city's preservation ordinance. These standards for demolition appear in the ordinances section 2-8-9 subsections D 1 through 6 and E. The 6 standards, according to our agenda tonight, that we will be reviewing, and I'm going to give the preparatory language here as well. Standards for review of demolitions. In considering an application for a certificate of appropriateness for demolition, the Commission shall consider only the following general standards and the standards included in subsection 2-8-9E. Number 1, whether the property, structure, or object is of such historic, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance that its demolition would be detrimental to the public interest and contrary to the general welfare of the people of the city and the state. Number 2, whether the property, structure, or object relates to the distinctive historic, cultural, architectural, or archaeological character of the district as a whole and should be preserved for the benefit of the people of the city and the state. Number 3, whether demolition of the property, structure, or object would be contrary to the purpose and intent of this chapter and to the objectives of the historic preservation for the applicable district. Number 4, whether the property, structure, or object is of such old, unusual, or distinctive design, texture, and/or material that it could not be reproduced without great difficulty and/or expense. Number 5, whether the property, structure, or object is of such physical condition that it represents a danger and imminent hazard condition to persons or property, and that retention, remediation, or repair are not physically possible or require great difficulty and/or expense. Number 6, except in cases where the owner has no plans for a period of up to 5 years to replace an existing landmark or property, structure, or object in a district, no certificate of appropriateness shall be issued until plans for a replacement structure or object have been reviewed and approved by the Commission. Subsection E, in addition to the above standards, the Commission shall also consider the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties as amended. The Commission itself will only review tonight the historic preservation related issues specific to the city's certificate of appropriateness application for the demolition of the Harley Clark Mansion. And just in terms of our scope, the Commission's discussion and deliberations will focus on these standards and obviously on the extensive background information that was provided to us in our meeting packets. I can tell you from working with these folks over many years that our commissioners are prepared and have reviewed this information, so we're well aware of those contents. And also, all of the commissioners have completed tours through Harley Clark Mansion last Saturday. We had a series of hourly visits for commissioners in pairs. Frankly, and all of this background will frame our questions and our observations as we conduct our deliberations. In terms of the meeting process, there was a memo that was posted from me with the meeting materials yesterday or this morning, I think. The commission meetings, essentially, just to give all of you a little bit of an overview, are organized a bit differently than those of the city council meetings. And just as some points of information from process, the meeting itself will begin with the presentation by the applicant, which is obviously the City of Evanston. City staff will describe how and why this application meets the ordinance standards that were just described. Once that presentation is complete, all the speakers that have signed in, and I think my number is right, there are 35 here that have signed in, will be called in the order in which you've signed in, and you will then be speaking for a 2-minute time slot. Any additional letters or emails or other communications, and we received a few tonight as well as earlier this afternoon, are going to be acknowledged, just so we don't take some of them are fairly lengthy, and we need to make sure that they're included in the record, but we want to make sure that those folks are acknowledged. You will be timed for that 2-minute slot, and if you do have any materials that you want to provide to us for insertion into the record, you can either give them to Carlos Ruiz or myself, and please feel free to reference those materials as you're making your presentation. As was mentioned before, there will be no PowerPoint or other visual presentations allowed as part of any of the comments. In terms of speaker time, there will be no yielding or ceding of speaker time. When you're done, you're done. And we ask that all of you be succinct in your presentation and avoid repeating any previous comments. Please feel free to affirm your agreement with a previous speaker. We want to know that. And we're asking, too, that just as part of our normal process, if you have specific questions related to the applicant's presentation, feel free to pose those questions in your 2-minute allotted time. And after all of the speakers have finished, the city staff, the applicant, will have the opportunity to rebut any evidence. They cannot restate what they have already restated, but they can do that. At that point, once everybody's done, I'll summarize what we've heard. For those, any particular objections or particular questions that I mentioned earlier, Carlos and Scott will be recording those so that those are responded to. Once all of that's complete, the commissioners will begin their deliberations. We'll ask questions, share our observations, discuss our thoughts specific to the ordinance standards, and the commissioners, as I mentioned, are prepared to be focused on those standards. Once completed, the commissioners will have an opportunity to provide any final observations. I'll summarize our deliberations. We'll then proceed to a motion, and that motion will be followed by a roll call vote of the commissioners. And as part of that process, we'll identify any next steps. And with that, yes, Brad.
Will the city's presentations be available online tomorrow after it's been presented?
I assume so. It will be, yes. With that, we'll begin with the city's applicant presentation. And City Manager Bob Quitz, if you want to sign in and introduce yourself, I'm sure everyone knows who you are.
Sure. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, good evening. I'm Wally Bopkowitz. I'm the Evanston City Manager. I am here tonight in my capacity representing the owner of the property, the City of Evanston. I'll finish the rest of this. Have a short presentation to go through the application that was submitted. I am the sole representative of the property owner this evening. The other city staff here is here solely in their capacity as staff to the commission. So as there's questions and comments, please direct them to me. I wanted to start at least briefly with a history of how we got here this evening. As I think many folks are aware, the mansion really was owned by a man named Harley Clark. He was a gas company executive who lived in the house. And in 1951, the house changed hands from the Clark family to the Sigma Chi fraternity, and it served as their national headquarters from 1951 till 1965. In 1965, the City of Evanston purchased the property, which includes the lakefront, beachfront, and the building, the mansion itself, was then leased by the Evanston Arts Center, and the Evanston Arts Center was in the building from 1965 to 2015. In 2011, the City Council began a review process of various properties that we own to decide if it made sense to have other uses for them. For history's sake, those three properties back in 2011 were the Noyes Cultural Arts Center, the Harley Clark Mansion, and the Chandler Newberger Center. In 2011, the City Council decided to leave Chandler Newberger as is, and staff then went on a process of looking for other uses for both the Noyes Cultural Arts Center and the Harley Clark Mansion. Between 2012 and 2013, the city issued an RFP for the use of the property. We received one response from Tawani Enterprises, a organization headed up by Colonel Pritzker, that to purchase and renovate the property, and then ultimately in 2013 that proposal was rejected by the City Council. Next, the city continuing to look for a use for the property and a source for renovation to the building, entered into discussions with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. At that point, the state was looking at using the mansion for its Lake Michigan coastal programs staff. Those discussions continued until 2015. The change in governorship resulted in the request for the state to use the building was withdrawn. Then in 2015, a citizen committee was formed to study uses for the mansion. A report was made to the City Council, and at that point, the City Council decided to discontinue any further discussions. A year later in 2016, and that was, I think, largely because if you recall, we had a new governor. The state didn't have a budget for nearly 2 years, and so the council decided to put everything on hold. Once the state did have a budget again in 2016, the council approved for the city to keep the property, not to sell the property, and allocated $250,000 for improvements. Those improvements were later made just on the two fog houses, which are adjacent buildings to the mansion. And a Harley Clark Planning Committee was formed to discuss next steps. In 2017, RFPs were issued seeking qualified nonprofit entity to lease the mansion. One response was received from Evanston Lake House and Gardens. In April 2018, that lease was rejected. And then June to August of 2018, the Evanston Lighthouse Dunes proposed to fund demolition of the mansion and coach house. The city approved an MOU with Evanston Lighthouse Dunes and directed staff to proceed with the filing of a certificate of appropriateness application required to demolish the mansion. So I want to focus on a few of the specific standards, Chair Williams, that you went through that are for the Commission's consideration, and the city's stands on these particular standards. Standard 1 deals with the architectural style and design. It is the feeling of the city that the mansion and coach house are not prime examples of one particular architectural style or design, and that the design could be reproduced, which is a standard that permits demolition. Again, a picture, I think everyone's familiar. Standard 2, the buildings require a significant amount of financial expenditures to resolve current property code violations, and financial hardship must be considered as a reason for demolition. As I've demonstrated by talking about the time frame, the City of Evanston has spent the better part of 7 years looking at options for the mansion, looking for options for a renovation investment in there, and during the course of those 7 years, numerous studies were done. I think many of them have been made available. Certainly have been made available on the city's website. Part of the reason for this was the Evanston Arts Center, who had the lease with the city, did not perform the necessary maintenance, repair, or renovation work needed to keep the mansion in proper working condition. The main house has remained vacant for several years now since the Art Center left in 2015, and the coach house is in extremely deteriorated condition. The city believes that the current state of the property presents a danger to persons inhabiting or visiting the property. We did building inspections in 2012 and 2015, which identified multiple mechanical and plumbing code violations, resulting in repair estimates from $430,000 to $600,000. And those repairs would only make the house code compliant as a single-family home, not for the various other uses that have been proposed over the years. Achieving building code compliance for a new stated use would also trigger additional repairs and remodeling for that specific use, and the city, through the various community task forces that have looked at that, as well as the proposals from the Tawani Foundation and the additional initial work that was done by the state of Illinois, dealt with issues of accessibility and bathroom count. A walkthrough inspection was conducted to assess plumbing and mechanical systems in November of 2015. Additional violations were identified there that would also have to be remediated. Electrical code violations, again, a number of issues were found through the city's inspection, all of which would need to be addressed. Standard 3, dealing with the demolition of the buildings. Again, the demolition of the buildings as proposed by the City of Evanston would result in open lakefront land, which would restore the original condition of the property to its natural state, and represents that the lakeshore in the early days when there were no buildings present. This is a rendering, a drawing, I'm not sure what the artistic use there, but a depiction of the lighthouse grounds in 1873. So as you can see, at that point, there pretty much was just the lake house, some trees, and the lakefront. So the proposal to demolish both the coach house and mansion, just again for everyone's understanding of what is largely known as the Lake House Landing properties, beginning at the bottom of the screen to the south, the lighthouse keeper house and the lighthouse itself is owned by the City of Evanston, was granted to the city by the federal government, and is under a long-term lease with the Lighthouse Landing Park District. The fog houses are property of the city. We operate them and use them for summer recreational programs. Those buildings have recently gone through some renovation and would remain through the proposal for the demolition of the Art Center, Coach House, and the main mansion, which is the next parcel to the north as you move up the screen. The parcel just north of that is a wooded area that is property of the Lighthouse Landing Park District. And then finally, the last parcel that makes up the area is a Noah's Playground, a tot lot, which is the property of the City of Evanston. Again, another rendering to show specifically some of the property issues. The Lighthouse Park District leasehold for the lighthouse itself, plus the lighthouse keeper's home, and then the balance of the property there. So, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, on behalf of the City of Evanston, I'm here tonight to request that you grant the certificate of appropriateness to move forward with the demolition of the mansion. It's the feeling of the city that we have spent several years, 7 years, in fact, looking at alternative uses. We have what we believe exhausted those opportunities. The costs associated with the renovation, based on the studies we have done, exceed what the City of Evanston believes is appropriate, and we would like to move forward with demolition of the building. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. With that, what we'll do is begin with public comment before we start. There are a number of pieces of information that were received today in terms of comments and letters from folks. The first is from Aaron Packman, supporting denial of the certificate of appropriateness. There was an email from Beth Lang about allowing Landmarks Illinois access to the property. There was another letter from Allison Tunin-Talamo and Sebastian Krapowski in support of the mansion, retaining the mansion. We also received a letter from Paul Janicki in support of denying the certificate of appropriateness. Another and from Paul, I'll get to his last name, Bababian, I believe is how it's pronounced, from Simpson, Grumpertz, and Heger. And also a letter from Shara Sashtok in support of denying the certificate of appropriateness specific to Standard 1. We also received a copy of a statement from Bonnie McDonald for the commission, a letter from Alan Letter, the former executive director of the Evanston Arts Center, in support of the denial, a letter from Ann Sullivan, the program chair in historic preservation at the School of the Art Institute, in support of retaining the mansion, a letter from the Preservation League of Evanston signed by Mary Brugliera, Paul Janicki, Emily Guthrie, and Shirley Conley, and a couple of other folks in support of denial of the certificate of appropriateness, and also a letter from Neil Vogel from Restoric in support of denial. With that, the first speaker signed up for tonight is Bonnie McDonald.
Good evening, members of the commission. Thank you very much. I'd like to read my statement into the public record, please, but it is before you to also read. I'm Bonnie McDonald, President and CEO of Landmarks Illinois, the statewide historic preservation advocacy nonprofit. We have assisted Evanston residents for the past 4 years in their efforts to save the Harley Clark Mansion and develop a reuse plan. We urge you to deny the city's request for a certificate of appropriateness to demolish the mansion, stating the obvious fact that the mansion is a designated Evanston landmark, a building that this is city's own care, that belongs to its citizens, and for which the city is charged with protecting. The mansion is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, a list that was created in 1966 for the specific purpose of illuminating places to be preserved because they tell our nation's story. We note that the city's demolition application is deeply flawed in erroneously asserting that the buildings in their current state present a danger to persons inhabiting or visiting the property, and that remediating or repairing these require great difficulty or expense. There is no evidence to support this assertion to date. More confusing is the fact that the city's report provided with the application describes the building as in good working order and needing only minor, inexpensive repairs to comply with the building code. These incongruities necessitate an updated examination by appropriate experts. To address this, we submitted a request on September 28th to allow a select group of expert architects, engineers, and contractors to examine and assess the mansion's interior and exterior condition. The council denied our request. For your reference, I submit to you, which was provided, a list of many experts here this evening who we have assembled to speak to their previously submitted testimony. They will demonstrate that the Harley Clark Mansion continues to meet the Evanston landmark criteria and that there is no cause to award a certificate of appropriateness for its demolition. We hope you will agree with our experts' findings and vote to deny the demolition application. Thank you very much.
You're done. Thanks. Next is Anthony Borich.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. Thank you for your consideration of these important issues this evening. My name is Tony Borich, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Jenner and Block. We represent Landmarks Illinois in connection with the Commission's resolution of these issues this evening. I just wanted to make two brief points about the issue of access to Harley Clark Mansion. As the Commission members may know, Landmarks Illinois submitted a request to obtain access on behalf of the experts, some of whom you're going to be listening to tonight, and have submitted statements. We feel it is very important that such access be provided in order for this process to be fair to all sides, and for us to properly address some of the assertions that were made by the city manager in the materials and this evening. So we object to these proceedings continuing prior to providing that access to Landmarks Illinois. Secondly, Madam Chairwoman referenced the Commission's visit to Harley Clark Mansion. And I just wanted to remind the Commission that it's a requirement of the City Code that the Commission's findings, the written findings of fact, be in writing. And to the extent that there were observations or other evidence received by the Commission that may be used by the Commission deciding these issues, we request that those findings be made in writing. And finally, I understand that the city manager made some assertions tonight regarding, for example, the economic hardship of the city, the suggestion that this is going to be restoring the building to the natural state, and that they've exhausted opportunities for alternative uses. We don't think these assertions were adequately supported, and we object to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Lisa DiChiara, and Lisa will be followed by Ann McGuire.
Good evening, members of the Commission. Lisa DiChiara, also with Landmarks Illinois. Demolition Standards 1 and 2 of the City of Evanston Preservation Ordinance contemplate the benefit and welfare of designated landmarks to the residents of Evanston and Illinois. Undeniably, the demolition of Harley Clark Mansion will result in unprecedented loss of the city's architectural heritage, especially considering the public ownership of the property, which has historically provided public access and use of this great and irreplaceable landmark. As we know, built in 1928 by Harley Clark, he hired a prominent Boston architect, Richard Powers, and landscape architect Jens Jensen to design a lakefront estate where architecture and landscape are intrinsically linked. We believe demolition and destruction of this property should not be an option, especially considering its local landmark designation and the fact that the city purchased the property to ensure its preservation. If the City of Evanston demolishes its own designated landmark, this will set a terrible precedent for the future of designated landmarks in Evanston that are presumed to be protected. In addition to its irreplaceable architecture and landscape design, additional public benefit that preservation of the Harley Clark Mansion can provide relates to jobs, local economic investment, and the environment. Investing in historic places creates more jobs than new construction, and in this case, certainly more than demolition, per dollar spent because it is labor intensive. Preservation rather than demolition prevents otherwise reusable materials that could never be sourced again from entering the waste stream. Even deconstruction is not efficient in the use of material as preservation. Preservation of Harley Clark contributes to Evanston and the region as a more interesting place in which to live, work, and sustains our shared heritage, culture, and
Thank
civic
you, Lisa.
values. Thank you so much.
Ann McGuire, and then Ann is followed by Stuart Cohen and Julia Backrack.
Thank you, Commission members. I'm Ann McGuire. I'm a registered architect. I have my own firm here in Evanston specializing in preservation restoration. I'm a former instructor at the School of the Art Institute in the preservation program, and I'm a former Preservation Commission member. I first would say that I concur with the comments that have preceded me, and my only remarks tonight in my recommendation that this petition does not meet the standards for demolition is based on our experience when our firm, McGuire, Gillespie & Associates, was retained by the city to look at the building in 2012, as was described before. And this is when the Art Center was there, and this was to look at code compliance for it as an art center, not as a residence. But taken from that, I will say we indicated no major structural deficiencies were observed. The interior of the house was generally in good condition structurally, and the coach house was in good condition on the exterior due to recent restoration and repair work, and the interior was in poor condition because it had been uninhabited and had peeling paint, etc. I did see it again in 2017, and I feel strongly that the building is in safe condition and is repairable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Stuart Cohen. Stuart? Oh.
Hi, I'm Stuart Cohen, but I'm here speaking for Susan Benjamin, and I want to read an edited version of the letter she sent. Susan writes, I've asked Stuart to read my testimony into the record since I cannot be here this evening. I'm an architectural historian with over 40 years of experience writing National Register and local landmark nominations and evaluating properties for their significance for local governments. I am the co-author with Stuart of North Shore Chicago Houses of Lakefront Suburbs, which includes an essay on the Clark House. If you don't have a copy, please run out and buy one. I'm writing to encourage the Evanston Historic Preservation Commission to strongly oppose the demolition of the Harley Clark House. I will address the standards that the Commission needs to consider when reviewing demolitions. Standard 1, it would be detrimental to the public good should a house of this architectural caliber be demolished. When we wrote our book, Stuart and I selected only 42 houses from among numerous architecturally important properties on the North Shore. In the Harley Clark House, rarely do you see such a high level of decorative treatments and craftsmanship. Ornamental features including twisted columns, molded brick chimneys, highly detailed copperwork, and classical elements complement the graceful massing of the building. Standard 2, the demolition of the Harley Clark House would be contrary to the intent of the Northeast Evanston Historic District. I likely am uniquely qualified, that's Susan, not me, to address the significance of the Harley Clark House in relation to the Historic District, having been hired by the City of Evanston to prepare the nomination for that district where the house is located. Standard 3, there is no question that the demolition of the Harley Clark House would be contrary to the intent of the city's preservation ordinance, which was...
Stuart, your time is up.
I have about 15 seconds and as a conclusion.
We need to move along. Thank you, and Susan's statement is included. Julia, and then Julia will be followed by Audrey Niffenegger and Tom Hodgman.
Good evening. My name's Julia Backrack, and I'm a historian and preservationist with considerable expertise in landscape history, particularly the work of Jens Jensen. I served as the Chicago Park District's planning supervisor for 28 years and currently have my own consulting practice. I've written a few books, including The City in a Garden. I wrote you a long, detailed letter, and I mentioned, described each of the four standards, the first four standards, standards 1 through 4 of subsection 289E, and so I feel strongly that the demolition should be denied based on those four standards. Based on my detailed knowledge of Jensen's work and my involvement in the field of landscape preservation, I believe the Harley Clark Estate is among the nation's most important historic landscape resources. Only a limited number of Jensen-designed private residential properties remain today. Jensen was named the Dean of American Landscape Architecture by the New York Times, and in recent years his contributions have increasingly drawn national attention, including a full-length documentary called The Living Green, which has been shown throughout the nation and abroad. The Cultural Landscape Foundation concurs with my evaluation of the Harley Clark landscape as one of the nation's most significant historic landscapes. The Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organization has included the property on Landslide, its short list of the nation's most significant and endangered historic landscapes. The Cultural Landscape Foundation website states that the Harley Clark Mansion now faces impending demolition, which would leave an orphaned and illegible landscape that should instead be restored and maintained along with the historic structure. I also want to point out that the Harley Clark estate was one of the few private properties from the Chicago area that was included in Professor Leonard Eaton's seminal book, Landscape Artists in America.
Julia, your 2 minutes are up.
Okay, there's 3 pages in this book. Please get a copy of it.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Audrey Niffenegger. The Harley Clark House is an important part of the cultural history of Evanston. I've come here to speak for myself and many other artists who love this place. I first came to the Evanston Art Center when I was 14 to study printmaking. I was fascinated by the house and spent years exploring it and taking many classes in various parts of the building. Etching classes in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor, photography in the basement, drawing in the ballroom on the 3rd floor. The house itself was my instructor. I felt transformed by my time there. I first learned to teach in the Harley Clark House, and I taught there for 15 years. Making art and teaching have been my life's work. Many of my former students have been writing to me, wondering what will happen to this place that was at the center of our artistic lives for so long. So many artists had their first shows there, myself included, and the grand setting gave us the feeling that we had joined the conversation, that we were part of a real community. Artists have asked me questions about the fate of the house as though it is an old friend of ours who is in the hospital. What's the prognosis? We reminisce about better days, share old photos. There are marriages and children that wouldn't exist without this grand house. So many things happened because the Harley Clark House was a magnet for creative, curious, warm-hearted people. The beauty and serenity of the Harley Clark House gave me a sense of the seriousness, the importance of making art. We make art and houses for many reasons: to communicate with each other and with the future, to shelter and give solace, to be our best selves, to find a home. This is a place that was home for many generations of artists. We created, learned, and lived there. If this house is torn down, the empty space will be a sadness, a wound. Evanston needs places where its citizens can gather and experience a sense of calm and well-being. This house belongs to all. The Harley Clark House is still beautiful and sound. It stands waiting for us to give it its next life.
And your time is up, Audrey.
Please
Thank you
let this
very
house
much.
stand. We will fill it with joy.
Thank you. Tom Hodgman is next, and he is followed by Michelangelo Sabatino and Neil Vogel.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commission. Thank you for being here this evening. I want to speak. I'm Tom Hodgman. I'm on the board of Evanston Lake House and Gardens, the nonprofit that the city accepted an RFP response from and then declined to enter a lease with that you heard about earlier. I want to speak to the cultural significance of the building and also the assertion that it would require great difficulty or expense to repair. You've heard a lot about the cultural significance already. Just to highlight the future cultural significance, 1,500 people are on our email list, 800 people follow us on Facebook. We've received over 140 individual donations towards support of repurpose and reuse of the mansion. 2,800 individuals signed a petition asking the council to not demolish the building, as well as all of the people who signed the petition related to the referendum. In addition, there are many organizations throughout the community, the state, and nationally that support saving Harley Clark due to its significance. This includes the Preservation League of Evanston, Design Evanston, Central Street Neighbors, Southeast Evanston Association, the Northern Illinois Historic League, Landmarks Illinois, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Cultural Landscape Foundation, Open Lands, Jensen Ecology, the Liberty Prairie Foundation, Alliance for the Great Lakes, Lake Dance, District 65 third grade teachers, Northwestern Center for Water Research, and U.S. Representative Jan Schakowsky, to name a few. On the topic of great expense and difficulty, the city has had many opportunities to pursue renovation of the building. They allocated $250,000 in 2016, which they never spent. In 2016, they also directed the city to open an account with the Evanston Parks Foundation to accept donations towards the building to augment that $250,000. That account was never opened. The city has not applied for any grants, many of which are available. People have offered to write the grants for the city. They have declined. We had an opportunity with a 3-year period to raise funds to restore the building. They declined to enter that lease.
And your time is up, Tom. Thank you very much.
Good evening, members of the Commission. My name is Michelangelo Sabatino, and I'm the Dean of the Architecture School at the Illinois Institute of Technology. I speak as an educator and as a historian, saying that demolishing a significant part of the architectural landscape and social history of Evanston and Chicago will attract negative press and condemnation from around the country. It is not a coincidence, and Julia Bachrach already mentioned Cultural Landscape Foundation, based in Chicago, has already listed the Harley Clark and Gardens as threatened. Thanks to the efforts of illuminated organizations and foundations based in Chicago, a remarkable number of historic homes have been repurposed over the past decades. Recall how the Society of Architectural Historians spearheaded the preservation and reuse of the Charnley Persky House, and how the Graham Foundation for the Fine Arts adopted the same approach for the Maddener House. After reviewing the Evanston Preservation Ordinance, I believe standards 1, 2, and 3 are highly relevant criteria to consider when arguing against demolition. Standard 1, demolishing a building and garden landscape of significance would indeed deprive Evanstonians, Chicagoans, and Americans of an important part of their collective memory. Standard 2, since the property engages the Lake Michigan shoreline, it is distinctly part of the development of Evanston's built and natural environment. Standard 3, by demolishing a part of your history, you would undermine a rigorous preservation ordinance and open it up to future threats. And in closing, although I am relatively new to Chicago, I've come to really appreciate the communities of the North Shore in large part because of their historic houses and gardens. I encourage the members of the Preservation Committee of the City of Evanston to continue to serve as responsible custodians of our collective heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Neil Vogel, and Neil is followed by Paul Janicki and Ed Gurns.
Thank you very much. I had to follow Michelangelo. I've got many friends and colleagues that are on this commission that are in this room, and I just want to disclose that I'm no relation to Carl. Every time I go back to this house, I first went and looked at it in 2009, and I looked at the steel windows. The pricing I came up with was a quarter of what the city has proposed that the steel windows are going to cost. They're grossly exaggerated. Every time I go back there, I find something else special. Landmarks asked me to take another look at it after I've seen it dozens of times over the past 27 years, half of which I've spent in and out of working and living in Evanston. I saw all kinds of new details I've never seen before. Every stone is different. The coining, all the texture on the coining is different. It's a diaper pattern here. It's a basket weave there. The stone on the wall goes in and out, projecting in the planes. Very difficult to lay up, which I'll leave to my good friend Mario to talk about because he knows a lot more about masonry. I just want to close that when they asked me to review Standard 4, which I knew well from being on the commission, I said it not only embodies Standard 4, the commission's demolition ordinance, it does it better than any other single Evanston landmark. And I've worked a lot on Evanston History Center. We've restored the plaster ceiling there. We've restored many features there. To permit the demolition of the Harley Clark House would be a blatant disregard for the preservation ordinance, a travesty for the community and future, and erode the core of what makes Evanston so special. This place matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Paul Janicki.
Good evening, Commission members. I'd like to just talk about a couple of standards tonight. The standards are the only criteria that you can use, of course, in voting for this demolition. The first standard, as it relates to architectural significance or archaeological significance, the Harley Clark Mansion has been the titular gateway to Evanston when entering our city from the north. You know you've left well met when you pass Baha'i Temple and are entering Evanston when you come upon this gracious architectural gem. Scores of citizens have derived the benefit of gazing at the stately edifice, which is one of only 2 such houses available to the public in our city. The architectural style, sort of modified French country house, has very few examples remaining in the region. For these reasons, it does not meet standard number 1. Standard number 4, whether the property can be reproduced without great difficulty. As a practicing restoration architect, I'm involved in the everyday process of salvaging these structures and overseeing the repair of them. The design, as mentioned earlier, is unique and only one of a handful of similar examples. The notion of attempting to reproduce a structure like this with the craftsmanship that is so evident would take an army of craftsmen, which are now in short supply. Because of this, the demolition does not meet requirement or standard number 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ed Gurns, and Ed is followed by Peter Bababian, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, and Brad White.
Good evening. I'm here to speak to standard number 5. I've spent the better part of the last 28 years working for Wisjani Elsner, which is a firm that evaluates essentially the overall integrity and stability of buildings of all different sizes and all different ages. In 2016, myself and a colleague, on behalf of Landmarks Illinois, reviewed the house, specifically the foundation, the exterior walls, the roof, floor structure, the roof structure, with the primary goal being what is the general condition of the building. What we came back with after spending the better part of a day was that overall the building was in good condition. It was in need of some maintenance, but that would be expected for a 91-year-old building. Nothing unusual from that perspective. So overall, the building is in very good condition, especially given the age of the building.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Commission. My name is Peter Babayan. I'm a licensed structural engineer with the firm Simpson, Gumpertson, Hager. We do historic preservation and structural condition assessment. I'm here to give an update on the status of what you just heard from Ed Gurns at WJE. I looked at the property this year from the exterior, did a limited structural condition assessment for what could be seen from the exterior, given that there was no interior access, and we observed no conditions that indicate the building is in danger or imminent hazard to persons or property on the exterior. From what we can see, we looked at walls, we looked at roofs, chimneys, and balconies, and everything that we saw indicated that there was no structural damage. The extent of what we saw was items that should be done underneath a maintenance program, and therefore we provided those recommendations in the letter to you that was provided. But again, we have not seen anything that indicates the building is a danger, imminent hazard to persons or property on the exterior. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Brad White, and Brad is followed by Emily Barton and Mary McWilliams.
Hi, I'm Brad White, and I'm the co-author of the preservation ordinance with a previous Preservation Commission and City Council. And I'm a resident of Evanston, and I guess I just have to start out as I'm embarrassed. The presentation by the city shows a total lack of respect for the Preservation Commission for this process. There isn't an ounce of expertise. It's the city feels. I don't even know why we're standing up here talking about the standards, because they haven't even presented a case that would show that they would even have an iota of trying to meet the standards. No information on how much the costs are, no information on what the financial hardship is, nothing, no experts, no nothing. And finally, I'd like to focus on standard 6. There is no plan. This is the first time I've heard that we're going to go back to what it looked like in 1873. I've heard we're going to restore the grounds. I've heard we're going to restore the landscapes. I heard Jens Jensen's important, and now we're going back to 1873, and there isn't even a picture of it. They don't meet any of these standards, and I don't think that the Commission should be taking any action, particularly since they don't meet Standard 6. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Emily Barton, and I work for the City of Chicago's Historic Preservation Division, reviewing, among other things, adaptive reuse projects. But I'm here tonight as an informed and concerned citizen. I wrote my master's thesis on the Harley Clark Mansion in 2016, just after the building was vacated by the Evanston Art Center. My thesis, which I just handed out, examines the remarkable history of the mansion, a brief conditions assessment evaluating the status of the exterior, and multiple proposals for adaptive reuse. Due to access restrictions imposed upon the building by the City of Evanston after multiple requests, I was unable to view and properly assess the interior spaces while writing my thesis, but entered the building during the one-day open house in August 2016. Photos attached. Now, my job requires I go in a lot of abandoned buildings. I've fallen through floorboards on more than one occasion, and while I'm not a licensed architect or engineer, although you've just heard from some, I never once felt unsafe exploring the Harley Clark Mansion, and when I was finally allowed in, I examined every inch I could. Penetrating moisture caused by organic growth has affected the exterior masonry and caused spalling. The historic wood windows require extensive repair. I don't believe this is any worse a condition than many of the buildings currently undergoing repair and restoration in the city of Chicago and across the country. There are numerous examples of historic residential properties receiving a second life through adaptive reuse. The Colvin House, just 6 miles south on Sheridan Road, currently serves as co-working and event space. The Madliner House and Charlie Persky House in the Gold Coast are now being used as libraries, galleries, and educational spaces as the headquarters for the Graham Foundation and the Society of Architectural Historians. The Nickerson Mansion is home to the successful Driehaus Museum. The Wheeler Cone House on the near south side is a boutique hotel and event space. Proclaiming that there are no viable uses for the Harley Clark Mansion.
And your time is done, Emily.
Is frankly
Thank
a
you.
fallacy.
And Mary McWilliams is up now, and Mary is followed by, I believe it's Virginia Beatty and Carl Klein.
Hello, I'm Mary McWilliams. I've been involved with the Evanston Preservation Program since 1976. Under the guidance of architectural historian Dr. C. William Westfall, the Preservation Commission began identifying historic Evanston buildings in the late 1970s, and in 1981 named the Harley Clark House an Evanston landmark under 3 criteria. The building exhibited a high quality of architectural design, exemplified the work of a prominent architect, and exhibited a distinctive design. Demolishing this building would be detrimental to the public interest and contrary to the public welfare. Number 2, standard 2. The character of a community is not determined by the work of architectural stars, the Frank Lloyd Wrights of the world. Those architectural stars comprise a select group whose buildings, by their rarity, become the architectural centerpiece in a community. Rather, it is the work of many talented architects who did not achieve architectural stardom that defines the built character of a community. Their well-designed buildings are the essence of historic districts in places like Evanston. The overarching theme of the Northeast Evanston Historic District is the transformation of the area from farmland and cow pastures to a vibrant part of Evanston with an eclectic mix of houses for working, middle, and upper-class families. Architectural historian Susan Benjamin identified 18 French eclectic-style buildings in the district and declared the Harley Clark House to be the grandest French eclectic-style house in the district. The Harley Clark House is an important visual feature of both Sheridan Road and the Northeast Evanston Historic District. The building contributes to the distinctive architectural character of the district as a whole and should be preserved for the benefit of Evanston. For 43 years, the purpose and intent of the Evanston Preservation Program has been to identify historic Evanston structures and make every effort to protect those structures from inappropriate alterations or demolition. The Preservation Commission has consistently worked with applicants to come to reasonable and architecturally appropriate solutions. Applications to demolish Evanston buildings are rare. Historic Evanston buildings. The Commission has tried to find alternate solutions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Virginia Beatty, and she is followed by Carl Klein and Lori Keenan.
I have 2 points. One is history and one is landscape. We're very proud of our natural landscapes here in Evanston, and of course you all know that Jens Jensen was the person who came up with the idea, not only in the Chicago area, but was influential in the rest of the world. And history. Did you realize that the plot that this house is on, that is 5 acres, is part of 1,280 acres that were given to a woman, Potawatomi Indian by the name of Orange Willamette in 1829, 28th of July, 1829, and the thing was proclaimed then on the 2nd of January, 1830, and she owned the property, and she could not sell it or get rid of it or do anything with it to give it to someone else without the permission of the President of the United States. And it's rather interesting that a woman was given that much property, especially since her husband was quite well known and one of the 5 founders of the city of Chicago. I just wanted you to think history, what's been there, and what would this history be if this building is torn down? And secondly, if we can't think of anything else to do it, we might make it a sort of monument to all the women who have built Evanston. You know, you could have 13th century, 14th century, 18th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Carl Klein, and followed by Lori Keenan.
Good evening. Tonight you are hearing from many people about the benefits of preservation. Also, they are delineating why the City of Evanston's application does not meet the criteria for demolition under the Preservation Ordinance. I wanted to remind you what the 2000 City of Evanston Comprehensive General Plan states about preservation. The comprehensive plan was cited and relied on by the Illinois Appellate Court in 2015 as a codified plan. The plan states, quote, "Historic preservation continues to be a source of civic pride for Evanston, with a vital preservation community and with a rich architectural heritage. Evanston remains at the forefront of the movement to preserve individual buildings and historic districts that show outstanding architectural, historical, and cultural merit." It goes on to say, "Evanston should seek to preserve the structures and environments which have given the community much of its physical appeal and special visual character. An intangible but equally important value is the sense of history given to those who live here. The shared history of landmark homes gives continuity to the entire community. The loss of such buildings would affect all of us, not just a few areas or individuals. As you review the city's application for a COA according to the standards for review of demolition stated in the city's preservation ordinance, I hope you will follow what the codified 2000 City of Evanston Comprehensive General Plan states and deny the certificate of appropriateness for demolition of the Harley Clark Mansion, our beloved city asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Lori Keenan, and Lori is followed by Sarah Shostak and Allison Talamo.
Hi, my name is Lori Keenan, and I live in the 7th Ward. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm here on behalf of the thousands of citizens of Evanston who support the preservation of Harley Clark and our citizen group, Save Harley Clark. We strongly believe that the demolition of Harley Clark is wholly inappropriate. And my words here tonight represent not just my voice, but the voices and interests of this, not only this organization, but of the more than 86% of Evanston residents who voted to preserve in a city-sponsored and citywide poll when our current mayor chaired the first Harley Clark Citizens Committee in 2015. I also represent the thousands of citizens who have come to meetings over the course of the last 7 years. I represent the second Harley Clark Citizens Committee that recommended that the city move forward with a plan for adaptive reuse, and the more than 3,300 registered Evanston voters who signed a petition in just 10 days to put preservation of the building on an advisory referendum to put the issue on the November 6th ballot. 2 citizens groups have offered
her to pay the $15,000 annual maintenance fee, meaning that Harley Clark is not a financial burden to the city. We're currently working with State Representative Robin Gable's office to explore a plan which would turn the building into the renowned Jens Jensen Gardens into a true economic engine for cultural tourism. We reject the idea that it is appropriate to destroy this city asset, which Alderman Judy Fisk said was valued at more than $3 million in an interview on WTTW just a few years ago, especially at a time of economic hardship. And we encourage the city that might find a way to use the mansion to its financial benefit. Harley Clark is of cultural importance, widely supported by the citizens of the community. We urge you to reject this certificate of appropriateness. And as stewards of preservation, to please listen to the voices here tonight, which have for years been ignored by members of the City Council. Thank you for your time, your stewardship, and your service.
Thank you. Sarah.
I am Sarah Shostak, and here to speak to the fact that demolition would be highly detrimental to the city, the public interest, and general welfare under Standard 1. I'm here as an art historian whose research in ancient India, where experience of spatial features is integral to their meaning. Several speakers in their talks and in their written statements have named countless architectural features and materials of the house, the distinctive features down to the lime putty, and they've talked about the artistry of the master masons. Others have stressed how this structure has transformed them, in the case of Audrey Niffenegger, in fostering the general education and pleasure of the people. It could not be clearer that the Harley Clark Mansion is no mere pile of bricks, as one of our aldermen has asserted. But my point is really to talk about the experiential significance of Harley Clark. Buildings provide shelter in all seasons, and in our houses, however humble, the solid walls of our dwellings allow for installation of lights and heating systems that support our survival. Architecture, fine architecture, on the other hand, provides spaces that go beyond mere shelter. They house our spirits while encouraging them to roam and to soar, and this is what happens at Harley Clark. As a public building now, Harley Clark offers such experiences to the people of our community. No wonder that Audrey was inspired and empowered to feel she was an artist. No wonder that Ann Jeanette's field trips for Youth Job Center clients included the opportunity to experience the mansion. In one sense, our lives are our collected experiences. They shape who we are, the skills we develop, and the choices we make. As we can see from what Aaron Packman has pointed out, we'll gain a lot by retaining the mansion.
Thank you. Next is Allison Talamo, and Allison is followed by Gregory Powell, I believe, and by Eleanor Taylor.
Good evening. My name is Allison Tunin Talamo. I'm also currently working with a restoration architectural and structural engineering firm here in Chicago, and I'm also an alumni from Illinois Institute of Technology. And what is unique about this estate, as I wrote in the letter, is this kickstarted my career into preservation. This is one of two. We've done an assessment on the structural foundation of the house. We also did an evaluation of the landscape itself, and understanding the importance of keeping both of these subjects together in one key element that's a rarity for you guys as a council and as a city to keep in mind. Because if you destroy one element, you're destroying the whole story. And I've been in y'all's shoes before. I've worked for a village in another project, and there was one point they were considering demolishing a landmarked building. And I went out, talked to other communities, tried to get an idea of how they developed a history, how they developed support system for this property. And it worked. The property still stands. We're gaining a lot of recognition, and it's helping the community. We generated a lot more business than we anticipated. So treat this as a gem. Treat this as a rarity, and abuse that privilege. Because I guarantee if you stand your ground and support this estate, you're going to have a greater story, a greater life expectancy for the area, and a true joy for the community to love and appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. Gregory, and Gregory's followed by Eleanor Taylor.
Good evening. I'm Gregory Dow. I'm a registered architect, and for over 10 years I have done condition assessments on buildings of all shapes, sizes, and ages. I'm also the co-author of the Wish-Janie Elsner report that we did on behalf of Landmarks Illinois. So I'm here to affirm what Ed Gerns has put on the record earlier, that the condition of the Harley Clark Mansion does not meet their criteria for Standard 5. It is not unsafe. It is not imminently hazardous. It is in a condition where it can be restored, and there are plenty of options for that. And if not, as we've heard, the money is there to mothball it. And if you haven't noticed, a bunch of buildings lately that have been mothballed for decades, like the old post office and Cook County Hospital, are being revitalized. So if you can't do it now, you can wait a while. But if you demo it, it's gone forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Eleanor Taylor, and Eleanor is followed by Nicole Kustok, and it's Y.A. Russell. Y. Russell. Is Eleanor Taylor here? Okay. Nicole?
I'm Nicole Kustok, member of the Lighthouse Dunes Group. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. We realize it's not often you have someone up here advocating in favor of taking something down. But our group feels that by removing both structures at 2603 Sheridan Road, you will be preserving the lakefront and spotlighting the Grosse Pointe Lighthouse. As you know, the lighthouse stood for more than 50 years before the Harley Clark House even existed. It is both a National Historic Landmark and listed on the National Historic Register. We argue it is currently being obstructed from the public view by the Harley Clark Home and Coach House, two buildings with decades of deferred maintenance. The City of Evanston is unable to afford the building, and as a result, there are only 3 options left to fund any proposed renovations and annual operation costs. You have taxes, philanthropy, or commercialization. Taxes are the one thing the public can actually agree on. No one wants to raise them or use them to support the house. 3 years of effort yielded no material donor support for Harley Clark. And commercialization of the lakefront is wildly unpopular and conflicts with the lakefront master plan. We realize this is a difficult decision, but removing the structure can also be the right decision. It results in parkland that is freely accessible and equitable for all of Evanston. It also allows City Council to focus its attention on more important issues. The resulting land will stay public forever, and the historic Grosse Pointe Lighthouse will shine as it did when it was first built. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Evie. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't able to.
I want to respond to just the obstruction of the lighthouse. I live only a few blocks away near Ryan Field, and I go in that direction almost every day, and I can see the lighthouse just fine. I don't see, the lighthouse is absolutely not obstructed by the building, since the lighthouse is right there on Sheridan Road, and you can see it clearly. I don't understand that. Secondly, it's not going to affect our taxes, since the funds that are necessary to go on with the plans that Representative Gable suggested are already there. 10 years of maintenance, that would be about $150,000, and we have over $200,000 already. One group has raised that, and there would be certainly more if we're given a chance to do that. The city had allocated funds in the past and has not used it, so I think that the city has always had a feeling of getting rid of this property. I feel that there is a disinformation campaign that was clear in the points that our city manager brought up today. For example, saying that the upkeep, to make it compliant would be for a single family home, that 400,000 figure that he mentioned. Well, I have here the estimate that was given to the Art Center in 2012 for that figure. And that Art Center was not a single house, it was an organization. I was in the Art Center myself since I was teaching and taking classes at the Art Center just before they left, and the house was in no danger. I find it very strange that in only 3 years or 4 years the house would have deteriorated to the point of being a danger.
And your time is up.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Next is Mario Michanicki, and Mario is followed by Tom/Barb Riley and Allie Harned.
Good evening. I'm Mario McNicky. I'm the owner. I'm a mason, stone mason and brick mason, also owner of Marian Restoration and U.S. Heritage Group. I came today to talk about quality, or maybe about the lack of quality in today's construction. What we have seen in this mansion is very unusual. I have traveled around the world. I've been trained by compagnons in France, by masons in Scotland and Ireland. And when I look at the mansion, I find so many details that are very unusual to any structures in America that I have seen. Most of my work today is training other masons. And unfortunately, it's sad to say that we don't have good masons that will be able to build such a beautiful building. The materials that I find in this building, from mortar to the brick to the style and technique of setting these, are very unusual. I consider this place to be a sanctuary for us to learn about the trades of the past. I consider this to be a place to learn about the quality, about the skill, about the pride of the craftsmen and craftswomen of the past. I consider this mansion to be a place to admire, enjoy, and learn from. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Riley.
Thank you. I'll keep this short. I'll defer to the experts tonight. I think a lot has been said already. My wife and I are 40-year residents of Evanston, and one reason we chose Evanston was because of the reputation it had as a preservation city. And this, to me, is like a previous speaker said, is an embarrassment. I think we're better than that. We're better than tearing it down. And I think there are many alternatives we could think of. Thank you. I'll defer to my wife for the next.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barb Berwin Riley. I'm just a resident. My husband and I just recently attended Open House Chicago with other architecturally significant homes that have been repurposed, and we were absolutely embarrassed that Evanston has become a laughing stock with the thought of tearing it down. It hurts and it's embarrassing, and I hope that Evanston can be better than that. We are owners of a house that's older than Harley Clark, not significant, but we've been held to all kinds of standards of maintenance, and I don't understand why the city is allowed to just let something sit and deteriorate when we are held to a standard that the city is not held to. I know there was money allocated. They refused to use the money. I think that is criminal. I don't understand why people can throw money and then they can get their way. That I hope we can be better than that. So I hope you'll consider not tearing it down.
Thank you. Next is Allie Harned, and she is followed by Jen Shader and Ray Friedman, I believe.
Hello, Commission. I'm Allie Harned, a Second Ward resident who has become deeply involved, along with many other hardworking volunteers, with the efforts to save this house through the citizen organization Save Harley Clark. Save Harley Clark was formed in July 2018 as a quick response to the possibility of demolition, and its very existence is a testament to Standard 1, as it shows the significance to the vibrant, activist, and highly opinionated community of Evanston. In 10 hot days in July, Save Harley Clark gathered over 3,300 signatures, though we only needed 1,986. People chased us down when we were gathering signatures, leaving coffee shops and missing trains in order to be able to sign. One woman tearfully told a story of her Girl Scout troop visiting the house when she was a young girl and couldn't believe that the house could be demolished. We've raised thousands of dollars to support our campaign with donations not only from Evanston, but also Oregon, New York, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and more. And we didn't have to shake any bushes to get these donations. They have come to us. One of our greatest supporters is an Uber driver who enthusiastically tells her riders about why they should vote yes on our referendum question. So if you get a ride in an Uber with car flags and literature in the back seat, enjoy the ride. I truly believe that this building is not a teardown, not even close. It is an opportunity for people to come together to talk about our shared vision for the city and to learn how a restored and revitalized Harley Clark can become an economic engine for a thriving community asset that serves everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jen Shader.
Hi. In discussing Harley Clark today, it's just as important to talk about Harley Clark the man and not just the buildings, because historic preservation isn't just about architecture and style. It takes into account cultural merit and the importance of what happened and who lived there. And with all due respect, City Manager Bob Quitz couldn't be more mistaken about who Harley Clark was. I'd argue that there isn't a single person in this room, including our city manager, not to mention many of our children, parents, and for some of us, grandparents, who hasn't directly benefited from Harley's commitment to changing the way people learn. Harley Clark was a self-made man who followed his passion, made and lost his fortune 3 times, and never wavered from his commitment to serve and give to others through philanthropy, education, and the betterment of society locally and nationally. In fact, Harley Clark's contribution to education was the thing that allowed the National Trust for Historic Preservation to work with our local group, since we had to prove national relevance. Harley Clark was an educational pioneer who championed film in education at a time when no one was even talking about such things. 100 years ago in 1918, Mr. Clark started the Society for Visual Education and personally funded a study in Evanston schools, including Foster School, which at the time was solely African American. This successful study proved the worth of motion pictures in education, and this groundbreaking curriculum was rolled out nationwide in 1931. While living in Evanston, Harley Clark was a fighter for and an innovator in new teaching methodologies. He committed significant personal resources and time to advancing movies with sound for the primary purpose of education. And in 1930, Clark gained control of Fox Films, allowing him to combine his resources while improving educational resources. And yes, as Wally mentioned, at the same time, he retained his role as the president of Utilities Power and Light Corporation. In addition to the broad support of public education causes, the Clarks were active philanthropists in Evanston, Chicago, and Lake Geneva, focusing on horticulture, arts, and underprivileged children. They were life members at the Art Institute of Chicago who donated heavily to the theater arts and repeatedly opened their home for multifaceted fundraisers. In 1931, the Clarks underwrote the Chicago Civic Shakespeare Theater to the tune of $500,000, the equivalent of $8.4 million today. And in 1933, Harley was a benefactor and trustee for the Century of Progress World's Fair exhibition. He and his wife continually donated, volunteered, and opened their home and raised funds for the Chicago Junior School for Orphaned Children.
And your time is up. Thank you.
They were among the original philanthropic families in Evanston, and they believed in equity and access for all.
Next is Ray Friedman, and Ray is followed by Betty Esther and Madeline Gellis.
Good evening. I'll keep my speech short and just say that I agree with everyone who has spoken before me, except for Ms. Kustak. I don't know why we're here tonight discussing demolition for this beautiful landmark property. The residents have shown their voices to that they want to save the mansion and use the mansion, and it wouldn't cost anything extra for the city of Evanston because it's privately funded. It seems to be a question of money. I'm embarrassed for the presentation of the city manager. I don't understand how you can say, you need to knock this down because it's going to save the city money. I figured out that you have approximately $100 million in new projects going on right now. Don't know where we're getting the money from to support this $100 million in new projects. So this is funded by, it's privately funded. So, and it's a beautiful building, and people are, wanting to support it. So I don't know why we're here. Please save the mansion.
Thank you. Madeline Gellis, Betty Esther, and then Madeline.
Good evening, thank you. When I moved to Evanston here 26 years ago, I caught a bus that kind of went by, and I could see when it turned, that was the 201 going to Evanston Hospital, now North Shore. I could see the building over there and wonder what it was. Looked it up, saw, okay, the Harley Mansion. Okay, it's over there. Figured somebody stayed there, didn't do any more looking or worrying about it or asking about it. In 2007, I went back to the library, found the building, and saw a picture. I said, this should be my house. At that time, I was working on a project for creating permanently affordable housing here in Evanston. Today, we have 20-some permanently affordable housing unit here in Evanston that will be affordable forever. We used that picture in our promotion and said, this is my house. It's my dream house, but this is the house I can own. And then forgot about it, went on about my business and stuff. And then it came up again, the art people was there, they moved, never went to any of their art stuff and everything. Then the people with the lake house and stuff, and up in the parish room, they showed all the different houses that was historic, how they was revitalized and reused. And then there was a group called the dance group. The young lady spoke with such passion as to what she could do with that building with children coming in there. And we said, yes, that could happen. And then like all of a sudden, the conversation got weird. And you wonder why. And I sit there and I listen and think back on it. And so she was talking about all the kids here in
and your time is up. Thank you. Madeline Gellis is next, and she is followed by Patrick Donnelly and the last speaker that is signed in, who is Jeff Smith. Oh, okay. Madeline just gave me a letter from Jenner and Block regarding the meeting.
I'm Madeline Gellis, Evanston resident and member of the Emeritus Board of Landmarks, Illinois. Everything has already been said. I have two quotes from Einstein. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. My question is, would Einstein be in favor of demolishing a mansion for the opportunity of more lawn? The second quote from Einstein, it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. We're in the instant, I'm a child of the 50s, just add water and mix, make a cake, make anything. Let's not go to 1965, let's not go to the 50s. Let's work on this. To our elected officials, I ask that you allow the citizens of Evanston to stay with this problem longer and help us solve it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Patrick Donnelly with Evanston Lake House. It's nice to meet you all, the Historic Preservation Commission. I've been wondering who you are. I'm a film producer, and I put 3 years into this. So where have you guys been? I would like to know what you're going to do when they overrule whatever you find tonight. I just assume there's no way you're going to approve this. What are you going to do when they overrule you because you guys are only advisory? If your heart is in historic preservation, are you going to help and join the cause? Are you going to speak against the city on this issue? Those buildings are bought and paid for. The Harley Clarks and the Jens Jensen families are upset about this. Provision 289D5 talks about safety. My kids were in that building when it was supposedly unsafe. And when they say there's no money to fix it, they just rehabbed a fountain for $7 million. So we can't hear that anymore. I know we're friends here. It seems like we're all friends here. But I think we need to put a little bit more effort into stopping this nonsense, because for 3 years we could have been fundraising and fixing this building. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Jeff Smith.
Thank you, members of the Commission. I'd like to speak primarily to Standard 5 with a nod to architectural significance. This building is not only usable, it was used. Until it was closed by the city for the previous decade, there were events that hosted thousands of Evanstonians. I have a list of just 10 that I pulled off the website, off the internet, that, well, between 2009 and 2015, ranging from the Evanston Chamber of Commerce to the Arts and Crafts Expo that was regularly run there, to the announcement of a mayoral candidate, not myself. If it was so unsafe, why were these advertised on the city website? Why was there nothing done? The building was in good condition when I was with DNR when we made an offer to buy the property. I don't believe in boondoggles. I don't believe in making offers to buy things that are falling down and can't be saved. We made an offer, and we made a substantial offer, the details of which have never been given to the people of the city of Evanston, because it's a usable building and because the Department of Natural Resources believes in conservation, and the fact that the Historic Preservation Agency of the state is now under the jurisdiction of the DNR does offer more possibilities going forward. So I'd like to end on a more positive note than my friend Patrick. I've got a lot of experience in private practice relating to construction, and I toured this building only a few months ago with an experienced construction manager who's rehabbed buildings, including at the University of Chicago, of similar scope and size and problems. And both of us were struck not only by the number of original historic architectural features, ranging from the uniquely colored slate tile and the hand-hewn panels to the octagonal tile features in the bathrooms, but by the soundness and the originality that persists. I would liken it to the Hemingway house in Key West in terms of durability, or what became the Excalibur and has gone through a number of iterations down in downtown Chicago.
Jeff, your time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a grand example of architecture. The city itself called it itself that.
Yes, Jeff, you're finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What you do is very important. Thank you.
Did you want to speak, sir?
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to sign up.
Okay, if I can ask you to do so.
Sure.
And you probably already heard the presentations are limited to 2 minutes. Thank you. And this is Bennett Johnson?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. Number one, they talk about the natural state, returning the property to its natural state. I lived at 570 Milburn when I was a child, and we have a picture of myself and my 2 sisters and cousins facing in the water, and in back of us was there was no beach. So the idea of this being returned to the natural state is a fallacy. Number 2, the fact is that demolition, there was an amendment suggested by and passed by the City Council to demand that the Dunes Group pay all the costs. It was not included in the memorandum of understanding. So therefore, there's no limit. The cost may eventually be held by the city for the demolition. Two, as many people have said, restoring the building will create an economic engine, not only jobs, but income and activity that will bring money into the city as well as people, and be an economic engine, not a problem. Finally, the public use. As I said, I lived there as a child at 570 Milburn. The building's no longer there because the waterworks has built a reservoir. But if the building stands, the Lake House Group has committed to bring kids in and young adults from all over the city. So the access to the lake at that point, it will be a place where black, brown, and low-income students can come and enjoy themselves at the beach. So I urge you to keep the building and give the private sector a chance to make it happen and benefit all the people of the city of Evanston. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there any last person that, I could ask you to sign? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. There you go. And your time limit is 2 minutes. Thank you. And your name is Ben Gaspara? Gaspara, I'm sorry, Ben.
Hi, I'll keep this really brief. I just wanted to say that, to quote Bonnie McDonough from Landmark, Illinois, that demolition should never really be considered, especially when there are adaptive reuse plans that are out there. I am here to read a portion of a letter written by someone who has expressed interest. Even though this person has expressed interest, they have been denied access, and so to also tail off of what Patrick said, it would be really great if we guys had your support. This is a building that changed my life personally, many of my cohorts growing up in Evanston. This is a place that's unique in the fact that it honors learning differences. It is one of the rare places where you can have small group programming, whereas some of the other places, let's say Robert Crown, which is poised to serve a lot of people who like athletics, there aren't as many places in Evanston that honor the people who have, are more sensitive and do better in smaller groups. So the mission of this organization is called One Community Museum, and it's to build a national network of community-based facilities, museums, which offer the public equitable opportunities for experiential learning. And thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak tonight? Okay, with that, the city manager has the opportunity to rebut any of the evidence that wasn't presented originally or covered in your original presentation earlier.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, thank you. In listening to the comments, I think the only piece that I'd like to clarify is the money that the City Council of Evanston allocated for the building, $250,000. That money was instead used on the fog houses. So the council made the decision to use that money for restoration, roof work, and other with the fog houses. Otherwise, Madam Chair, I believe everything else was contained in our original presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, I think we heard a lot tonight. I think much of the information that was presented by all of the speakers really addressed a lot of different issues associated with the standards. Much of this information obviously was included in our packet, and I think all of us have had the opportunity to review that. The city's presentation focused essentially on a couple of different standards. They also noted financial hardship, and I think our focus at this session in particular is really looking at the preservation-specific issues. They also cited code violations, among other issues there. The folks, they're the one presenter from the Lighthouse Dunes. Is that your organization? Yes, okay. Also noted their desire to return the site to parkland, beachland. With that, commissioners, questions for the applicant?
Just as a point of clarification, Madam Chair, I just wanted to ask the question that, or clarify whether or not we are just making a recommendation and how much weight is that holding. If we make a determination tonight that we're not going to support a certificate of appropriation for demolition, what could happen after that? I would just like that clarified before.
Alex, this is Alice. If you want to introduce yourself, please.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Alexandra Ruggie, Assistant City Attorney. So the process is clarified within the City Code for the Preservation Commission, and what you're doing here is certifying, providing a certificate of appropriateness. You're approving or denying the application. So it is a final administrative decision that is appealable to the City Council, or the applicant can revise their application and bring it back.
And my understanding as well is that potentially if the application is denied, the city could also apply for either a certificate of economic hardship or a certificate of special merit. Is that correct,
That's
Alex?
correct.
Okay. Or it can be appealed directly to the City Council if there's a denial.
Correct.
Those would be the three options.
Thanks for that clarification.
Questions about the application? No?
I'll start with a question. In the documents, one of the items regarding the maintenance of the Arts Center was the original lease, which I believe, I don't know if it was initiated in 1965 or there were some subsequent leases. And as it was stated, and it appears, I believe, in the city's document as well as in a copy of the Harley Clark Citizens Advisory Committee report, the city leased the mansion to the Arts Center for $1 per year, and they would maintain the interior, and that the city would be responsible for the exterior. That would mean that over that period of time, the city would have been responsible for many of the issues that people have been discussing and people have evaluated. We've heard a lot of that tonight, and it's appeared in many other reports. So I guess my question is, what was the city doing regarding the maintenance and of the exterior?
Certainly. I cannot speak for the entire time that the Evanston Arts Center was there. It is my understanding that there were periodic upkeep, mostly to windows, mostly to issues regarding moisture entering the building, and that was the extent of the exterior improvements that were made.
May I comment on that? Ironically, and they're listed in the McGuire report, I was responsible for about 6 or 7 projects at both buildings, meaning the Coach House and the Arts Center. A great deal of effort was made at the Coach House, so when people talk about the condition of the masonry at the Coach House, the windows, etc., I guess I'll take responsibility for that and or credit, depending on one's point of view. And in fact, I might add that there was a plan to restore the apartments that people have commented were not in good condition, and that was shelved in 2008. There was a shortfall in budget of about $30,000, and I estimated that the rental of those 2 apartments, which they are, aside from the rest of it, probably would have paid off the entire cost of the project within about 2 or 3 years. As to the main building, that was discussed but always shelved, other than repair of the roof at one time and the complete change of the coach of the greenhouse. But every time it came up, it was always discussed that that was the city's responsibility and not the Arts Center.
Elliot, if I can ask you to if I can ask you to relate that to the standards, if you would.
Okay, because one of the standards has to do with hazardous condition. I think there's been a number of people who have discussed the fact that they didn't find any hazardous conditions. I went through it again on Saturday. It didn't look any different than when I've seen it starting in '94 and going through 2010 and thereafter. I didn't see, and in fact, in the documents that you presented, one from, I think it's the plumbing inspector, he's not identified, and one from the electrical inspector. Most of those are what I will almost call trivial. Actually, I guess I will call trivial items and not violations of the sort that represent what is known as hazardous and dangerous. Having trained inspectors for the city of Chicago, I can tell you what I know what is hazardous and dangerous, and there's nothing there that's hazardous and or dangerous. And I would appreciate a comment as to why we don't have anything here that makes that case.
I believe the 2012 and 2015 building inspection reports, Mr. Magnum, I'm not sure if they were provided or not as part of the city's application. So that is the information that we have, and the city stands by the inspections regarding the interior.
The plumbing inspector doesn't even cite any actual violations. He simply identifies that 2 of the washrooms might have to be ADA compatible, but that depends on the use of the building. There's no violation cited.
Again, I believe, Mr. Magnum and Madam Chair, that the reports were provided by the city.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Sort of to echo Elliot's observations, essentially in going through the property on Saturday, looking at some of the issues there, and certainly there are condition issues that are evident in the building, and also reviewing the city's information that you just referenced. I guess from my standpoint, I didn't find any issues associated with the physical condition that would necessitate demolition, in my mind. I also want, in terms of a couple of the other standards, the interior of the building and the features in the interior of the building are really quite extraordinary, as is the exterior. And I think looking at it as a historic resource, it certainly meets, in my mind, does not meet 1, 2, 4, and 5 anyway, at all. And that's where I think some of the detail in the application simply just doesn't address those factors. So, other questions, comments?
We've been talking about the McGuire report, are we able to cite from that and bring it up on the screen?
I think Carlos, can you bring?
It's in
the packet. It's in the packet.
So are we able to pull that up?
I don't think we can, or do you have it up there?
Okay. I mean, just to summarize a few things in reviewing it, again, this is from 2012, but much of the application is, especially in regards to standard 5, with the repairs and the hazardous conditions. I haven't found anything to support that in that very report that you're using. specifically, to quote it, on the exterior, it says, it starts with, on page 8, no major structural deficiencies were observed in the EAC or Evanston Art Center. The conditions observed are generally a result of deferred maintenance, and material degradation, which I think has been sort of voiced and echoed throughout. It goes on in the interior. The interior of the house appears to be in good condition structurally. Again, there's really no mention of anything that speaks to public hazard or, a hazard of conditions to persons or property. The other thing that I found interesting was that the quote for $430,000. If I review that budget, which was also presented in here, it's on page of the packet on page 331. The budget is a preliminary budget for code compliance, and it says that this is the minimum code upgrades for no change in use. In other words, the Evanston Art Center stays, is what it says, and that totals $430,000. It goes on, and much of that is to, there's portions there that include improving the kiln room in the basement for extra ventilation and fire compliance and things of that nature. A few pages after that, it talks about what budget would be required for providing other business use, and it's about half of that, $265,000. So it seems to be some discrepancies in the application and what's being referenced in terms of economic hardship. And as Elliot, my co-commissioner, said, there really isn't much presented there beyond that.
And
I think that was in packet
3, I believe, or was it?
If you pull it up, I can show you which one it is.
Tim, do you know which packet it's in? Do you have it in front of you?
I have it, but
Look at packet 3, the first one.
it's document on the bottom, document ID, that one right there, 528. Nope, up one. That one. So this is about 6 million pages long.
Yeah.
I think it's the last.
And it's the budget is on page 331 of this document, so it'd be better to scroll or continue until next month.
I don't know if it's in.
It's the end of packet 3. It's item 10.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. Yeah.
Yeah, please be seated. Thank you. Well, we have a lot. These packets are quite long, so we'll get there.
It shows up twice.
Yeah, it does.
So since we're going to pass through it, we can stop at the McGuire report when we see it come through here. Okay, so it's going to be after this section. Keep going.
Yeah. And just sort of to add on, one of the things I noted too is back in the 77 Lighthouse Plan, they talked about some of the joint maintenance plans and issues go back that far.
So, okay. Now, this is the RFP. And it's right after that. So here we go. So let's go back up to the title page, just so we're on the same page here. So this was prepared for the City of Evanston by McGuire, Gillespie and Associates back in June 25th, 2012. So on page 8 of this report, if you use the page numbers on the report itself, we kind of get into, we're describing, and there is, I found it interesting too, in some of the descriptions they're mentioning, actually you're passing it up, I think. So let's see. So page 5, I'm sorry, keep going. It mentions historic this and historic that, which I think, again, support some of the things we're talking about with some of the other standards. If you move to page 8, it talks about the exterior condition of the EAC, in other words, the Harley Clark Mansion. Right here. So this is existing conditions, EAC exterior at the bottom. No major structural deficiencies were observed in the EAC. The conditions observed are generally a result of deferred maintenance with resulting in various states of material degradation. Talks about plant growth, talks about exterior stairs being in very poor condition. On page 9, then gets into the interior summary. Interior of the house appears to be in good condition structurally. Again, this is 2012. Perhaps that's changed, but we did all tour the building, and I think we all share that.
Yeah, and I think the issue is normally, though, our typical review in terms of the standards for alteration and the standards for construction are of the exterior, but I think in our various times going through the building, at least this was kind of my personal approach, was really taking a look at what the impact of some of those interior issues mean for the actual building or structural envelope, and how that plays into the issue of demolition. One of the other points that I would like to note is particular to Standard 1, which is perhaps a bit more generic, but it gets to the issue of the commission, what the commission itself does, and what our statement of purpose is in terms of preserving and protecting and enhancing and encouraging rehabilitation of buildings as well, which is cited, I think it's at the very beginning of the ordinance, actually. So, other observations about the standards?
Well, I want to echo. Sorry. I want to echo the point that was just made, because that evaluation was really based on it still remaining as the Arts Center, so that many of those costs, particularly the issue of ventilation and all the rest, become moot if it doesn't remain as the Arts Center. I think the Weiss-Janney report, which is much more recent, pretty much establishes that the condition actually is as good, if not better, than wherever Ann is here indicated. So I don't think that part of it was an issue. I think in terms of the standards, Diane, and I don't want to read it, and she never had time, but I think that those who have read, where's Mary? Mary's document.
Yeah, Mary
I think
went.
Mary establishes almost every, she cites and goes through each of the standards, and I think very, very effectively.
Yeah.
Much better than any of us can repeat. And it's unfortunate that not unless people look at the website, it's all there.
But it's definitely part of the record.
Yes.
So, other commissioners.
I have a question for the city manager. Has the city explored the costs for demolition and the naturalization plan that's required, and can you share those with us?
Certainly, as part of the discussions with the Lighthouse Dunes Group and the MOU that we've entered into, there are costs associated with that there. I could pull that up if that would be helpful. Otherwise, it's on the city's website. To see, Madam Chair, would you like me to walk through those terms?
Again, just in relation to the hardship that's created, I'm just wondering if there's relevance there.
Yeah, I think that our focus is really more on the preservation piece of it than the economics, I think, at this point, because we really have like a whole series of numbers out there. I'm not sure that we're going to get to anything definitive. Carl or Jamie or Rob or Sally, Do you have any questions for the city manager? Jamie?
I don't have a question, but I wanted to say that you just recently went through the standards and noted 1, 2, 4, and 5. And my interpretation of 3, that tearing down something that's designated locally as a local landmark is contrary to the objectives of historic preservation.
Yes. Thank you.
I think it's, really critical that people actually see the inside of the house. And since I only saw it on Saturday for the first time, I mean, it's incredible. So, we're not reflecting on how incredible it is. And in terms of the standards, I don't think the city's proposal meets any of them. I mean, it would be very detrimental to the public interest to lose this house. It is historic, cultural, and architecturally significant, number 2. It's a big part of what makes Evanston feel like Evanston is that sense of history driving down Sheridan Road. And that's number 3, right? It's the historic district that it's in. Number 4 is is it old, unusual, distinctive? I mean, there's nothing like it. How many stock market crash, gilded mansions are there open to the public in the United States, in Evanston? So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how we could ever even consider this.
Rob and Sally, do you have any questions for the city manager or some?
I don't have any questions. I'm not an architect. If you didn't know, actually. My experience in architecture was with Peter Holston. He's an affordable housing developer in Chicago, and he took a couple of buildings back in the early 90s and repurposed them or adaptive use. He actually turned one into an SRO, the Midwest Hamlin, in my old neighborhood where I grew up in Garfield Park. And 245 unit SRO, and I got really excited about not only historic tax credits and putting financing together, but I got really excited about kind of repurposing buildings and using a building that was, it was a great building for the 1920s, where a lot of the execs from the Lake Street were able to go to this club, and it had a couple ballrooms. It had a Olympic-sized swimming pool in the basement. We weren't able to do anything with the stuff in the sub-basement, but we were able to provide housing for people. And, I think about, I had not been in the Harley Clark Mansion until Saturday, I'm sad to say. And, I live in the 8th Ward, by the way, so I'm not on this end a whole lot, except for coming to the Civic Center and Chandler and things of that nature, but not a whole lot around that area. But it was breathtaking. It was undeniable that, and I was walking around with an architect, so I was asking a lot of questions about things that I didn't know. But I was struck by the building, and I was, I said, wow, this is a really cool building. And, according to the standards, especially Standard 5, I did not see structurally where, and I was in the basement and I was looking for cracks. I was looking for where is there a spot where this is, structurally not sound. And I didn't see that. So I just wanted to echo that.
Thank you. Sally?
I evaluate buildings for site, structure, and interiors. I do property condition assessments as a profession, as an architect. But I was inside the building on Saturday and saw very little, if any, structural damage. That some abutments on the outside, some failing mortar, perhaps a little bit on the exterior. But we were up in the attic. We went all the way up You can see where the city has repaired some boards in the wood deck. We didn't see any major leaks. I think there was one minor leak. They've maintained the boiler. It's been inspected. It's good until 2019. The electrical work was redone when the Arts Center moved in, according to a conversation I had with the head of the Arts Center. So I did want to just say that in concurrence with what others have also said that they observed last Saturday. I also wanted to comment very briefly on its cultural significance. I know that our commission recently approved landmark status for the former Foster School, which is privately owned now by Fleetwood Jourdain. And we granted its historic preservation landmark status based on its cultural significance. And even though it is not a city-owned property, I think it's important to pay attention to what the people care about.
Thank you. Julie, you haven't said anything? Or any
Right, well-
questions, observations?
Here's my observation. I continue to be very concerned that this building is not being maintained in any way. I was through the building. There's garbage that is sitting in a garbage can. There was there was air conditioners that were just sitting in the attic space. There was a door onto a balcony with a giant opening at the bottom where snow will get in. So the continued delay of any action on just maintenance to this building will just continue to allow this building to deteriorate. It is unforgivable. Just want to say that.
Did you want to relate that specifically to standards?
No.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
I have no questions about the standards.
Okay. Mark or Ken?
To speak last and wrap it up, I guess the 5 standards for demolition all clearly apply to this application. I have seen nothing presented to justify the demolition under any of these 5 standards. It's the first 4 all relate to its significance and architectural character and uniqueness. I think it's very clear that it's a significant building. It's a significant piece of architecture. It's a unique design, and it would be a great loss to the city if it were demolished. And under number 5, I agree with many other of the experts that have seen it that it's in surprisingly sound condition and could very easily be protected and mothballed for 5, even 10 years while we figure out what the right permanent use and the right permanent organization to use the building would be, and come up with that renovation plan. It is unfortunate that the last 50 years the city hasn't done what they should have to probably maintain it as well as it could have easily been, but it still is very salvageable and very repairable. And that's
Mark, Tim, or Elliot, any final comments? Okay.
I think, sorry. In looking at all this application and all the rest, the one word that kept coming up, and at least one, if not 2 people tonight used it, was stewardship, or being stewards of preservation. And it's funny because this afternoon I went and decided I'd look up, the term and all the rest, and the simplest definition is that conducting and supervising or managing of something, especially the careful and responsible management of something entrusted in one's care. And that's really what this is all about. And it's not just that the city has a responsibility and has had one for a very long time, which I think a lot of people have mentioned, about stewardship of this building, but to some extent it also applies to everybody else in this room or to all of the citizens, because this is all part of it. It's not about economics. It's really about everything that all of us, I found a quote this evening about it, and I thought I'd copied it and had to look it up while we were sitting here, where the person says, it's about humanity and how it's contained in the man-made world around us. It's about the old ways of thinking. It's about the old ways of living. It's about much of what seems to have vanished from the world we live in today. And that's it.
Thanks, Elliot. I sort of would like to make, before I summarize, one last comment, and that is I tend to agree with Ken on the issue of mothballing this. I don't necessarily see where there's a real imperative or need to demolish the structure at this point. I think that a couple of folks noted that there are examples of things that have been mothballed or for many, many years and have ultimately found their use, as long as that use isn't dictated. It needs to fundamentally be market-based. So in my mind, as I mentioned, I have issues with the application meeting, all of the standards that we've discussed. I think that's essentially what I'm hearing from all of the commissioners. And I think at this point we're ready to entertain a motion on this one, unless there's any further questions for the city manager at all. Would someone, I think at this point, in terms of the finding of fact, in essence, we've found that the city's application does not meet any of the standards, am I correct? And as part of this, what I would like to do is, as part of any motion, is to request that our findings of fact, based on the discussion that we've had tonight, be put, I want to direct staff to prepare a report to that effect that would be reviewed at our November meeting and then submitted to the city manager's office and to the council or whomever.
I have a question. An early, I guess, public speaker indicated, I think it was the second person, about whether or not the reports or our observations from Saturday
I think that what we'll do is ask Alex to take a look at that. I'm not sure what we tried to do with that was to make sure that it wasn't exactly a meeting, and so I want to have legal counsel weigh in on that particular issue. And we have, I think it's Andrew Gorsuch. Is that your? We have.
Yeah, you were the one that brought
Anthony,
it up.
I'm sorry, Anthony Porch. I'm very bad with names tonight. We have your letter, and what we will do is make sure that Alex has that to take a look at and can respond to that. Sure. I think we understand where you're coming from on that issue. With that, if we could entertain a motion on the certificate of appropriateness. And Carlos is going to, instead of our usual way of aye, nay, blah, blah, we're going to have a roll call on this one. Okay?
Very good. I move that we deny the request for certificate of appropriateness for demolition. Demolition standards 1 through 5 apply, and none have been met.
It's actually 1 through 6 on the...
1 through 6. Does 6 apply, though, since there's not a new construction?
I don't think 6 applies.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. Let's just, 6 does not apply. Do we agree?
Yeah, there's no
on
proposal
that?
to build a new building, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Demolition of the Harley Clark Mansion and Coach House.
If I can ask you, for the record, to restate that motion, please.
Sure. I move that we deny the certificate application for certificate of appropriateness for demolition of the Harley Clark Mansion and Coach House. Demolition standards 1 through 5 apply, and none have been met by the application.
And if you could add the findings of fact for the November meeting, too.
And the findings of, we further
staff.
direct staff to prepare a report of our findings of fact, the draft of that report to be reviewed at the Preservation Commission's November 9th meeting.
13th.
Sorry, November 13th meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mark got it. Okay. Carlos, you want to call the roll?
Commissioner Beatty?
Rob?
Commissioner Dudley?
If you
Robert,
can-
you need to speak into the mic,
You
Rob.
can speak into the microphone.
Saying yes or no? Restate that for me again. The motion is to deny. It's yes. Sorry.
The motion is to deny, correct?
Correct, yeah.
All right. Just making sure. Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Dudnick?
Aye. That's to deny.
Commissioner Hacker?
Aye to deny.
Commissioner Idle?
Aye.
Commissioner Risenhan?
Aye to deny. Aye to deny.
Commissioner Simon?
Aye.
Commissioner Vogel?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
You forgot Jamie Morris.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Morris?
Aye.
That would be 2.
Commissioner Schmidt.
Yeah.
Aye.
I was going to get you. I couldn't see the
Commissioner
list.
Smith?
Aye.
Yeah. 10?
What they had.
So that would be 10 ayes.
And then me.
And Commissioner Williams. I'm sorry, Chair Williams.
Aye.
Sorry.
The motion, the vote is 10-0 to deny the application for a certificate of appropriateness for the Harley Clark Mansion. And if I can ask the commissioners, please, for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move we adjourn the, is it a meeting or a public hearing?
Or it's the
Second.
special meeting.
Adjourn the special meeting.
Second.
I second.
Okay, all in favor signify
Aye.
by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?